Henry Winkler wasn't cast as the star of Happy Days, yet he became the heartbeat of the show. But while the world celebrated Fonzie as the ultimate symbol of cool, life behind the set of Happy Days was nothing like the fantasy on screen. Producers kept a tight grip on the show, enforcing rules the audience never saw. And when the show ended, those rules left scars that followed Winkler for decades. But above them all was one rule that defined his time on Happy Days. A deeply disturbing rule he could never escape: the rise of the Fonz. The moment Fonzie hit the screen, Henry Winkler went from just a face in the crowd to a symbol of cool recognized everywhere he went. The show launched him into a level of stardom few actors ever reach. However, behind the applause and the spotlight, Winkler carried a secret. The set of Happy Days was far from carefree, and the producers enforced several rules that completely altered the way the show was perceived by the audience. Henry Winkler grew up in New York City under the heavy expectations of parents who believed in discipline, achievement, and survival above all else. But life was far from easy, because at that young age, Henry had dyslexia, a secret struggle he didn't understand at the time. It went undiagnosed throughout his childhood, leaving him to battle constant frustration in school. Reading was painfully difficult, his grades slipped, and his teachers dismissed him as lazy, with each failure chipping away at his confidence. Yet, even as the classroom dimmed his self-esteem, the stage lit him up. Acting was about expression, performance, and presence, things Henry naturally excelled at. Determined to prove himself, he pursued the craft seriously, earned a bachelor's degree at Emerson College in Boston, and then made the leap into the elite world of the Yale School of Drama. Yale was no easy ride, but Henry thrived. It was there that he trained as a serious stage actor, honing the kind of discipline and technique that would one day set him apart in Hollywood. After graduating, Henry stayed with the Yale Repertory Theater for nearly 2 years, performing in demanding stage productions that gave him credibility as a rising actor. But the theater world didn't pay much, and Henry knew television and film held bigger opportunities. And so, he packed his bags, left New Haven behind, and started auditioning wherever he could. Like most aspiring actors, his earliest gigs weren't glamorous. He landed commercials, small TV parts, and even a guest role on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Every job was a stepping stone, and his break into film eventually came with a small part in The Lords of Flatbush in 1974, where he played a Brooklyn gang member. That role gave him exactly the kind of tough guy edge that casting directors in Hollywood were starting to look for. And soon, it would put him in the path of the project that would change his life forever. Meanwhile in Hollywood, producer Gary Marshall was developing a sitcom inspired by America's nostalgia for the 1950s. The show was called Happy Days, and at its core, it was meant to focus on Richie Cunningham, played by Ron Howard, and his wholesome all-American family. But Marshall wanted to add a spark, a character who could shake things up. The casting call described a tall Italian tough guy, someone who looked like he had just stepped off the streets of Brooklyn. Henry Winkler was neither tall nor Italian. In fact, he was a short Jewish actor from New York with a distinctly different vibe. Yet, when he walked into the audition room, everything changed. Henry knew he wasn't what they were looking for, so he decided to give them something unforgettable. Instead of delivering his lines the traditional way, he improvised. He leaned into silence, letting his coolness do the talking. When he finally opened his mouth, he punctuated the scene with a simple sound, "I," stretching the word into a moment that instantly felt iconic. And when asked to comb his hair, he refused, pushing back with the attitude that would later define Fonzie. That refusal became his signature. The producers were stunned. Against every description on the casting sheet, Henry Winkler was chosen. He officially became Arthur Fonzarelli, better known as Fonzie, debuting in January 1974 when Happy Days first hit television screens. At first, Fonzie was just a side character. He wasn't written as the heart of the show, just a leather-jacketed troublemaker who popped in occasionally. But audiences couldn't get enough of him. His charisma was magnetic, his swagger undeniable, and his catchphrases immediately stuck. Within a season, Fonzie wasn't just part of the show, he was the show. By the time Season 2 rolled around, Fonzie's popularity had exploded to the point where producers even considered renaming the series Fonzie's Happy Days. Ron Howard's Richie might have been the moral compass, but Fonzie was the character everyone tuned in to see. His leather jacket, his motorcycle, and his famous "Ayy" and thumbs up all became cultural landmarks of the 1970s. Kids wanted to dress like him, teens copied his slang, and Fonzie became the ultimate symbol of cool. The show's popularity reached a fever pitch. By its third season, Happy Days hit #1 in the Nielsen ratings, cementing itself as a national obsession. The series ran for 11 seasons, producing 255 episodes and embedding itself into American pop culture. In fact, in Milwaukee, where the show was set, a bronze statue of Fonzie still stands, immortalizing him as a legend. Henry Winkler wasn't just popular with audiences. Critics took notice, too. He received 2 Golden Globe Awards and earned 3 Emmy nominations for his portrayal of Fonzie. Decades later, TV Guide ranked Fonzie among its 50 greatest TV characters, a recognition that speaks to how deeply he resonated with viewers. And yet, as much as Fonzie's rise looked like a dream come true, behind the scenes, the reality was much more complicated. Fame had its price, and the strict rules on the set of Happy Days weighed heavily on Henry Winkler. He may have become America's symbol of cool, but there was one rule he was never allowed to break, a rule that haunted him long after the cameras stopped rolling. The dark side of Happy Days. When viewers tuned in every week, Happy Days looked like the perfect television family. Smiles, laughter, jukebox music, and of course, the Fonz, making everything cooler with a snap of his fingers. But what people didn't see was how complicated things were once the cameras stopped rolling. Behind all the fun, the cast battled frustrations, personal struggles, and rules that kept the set far from the happy place audiences thought it was. One of Henry Winkler's biggest frustrations was with Fonzie's dialogue. The producers wanted more lines, more jokes, and more chatter, but Winkler had a very different vision. He believed the Fonz worked best when he said less, and that a look, a gesture, or his famous catchphrase could carry more weight than an entire page of dialogue. He wanted to keep the character mysterious, cool, and unpredictable. But pushing back against producers wasn't always easy. They wanted to fill scripts with words, while Winkler wanted to strip them down. This constant tug-of-war over Fonzie's voice left him exhausted at times, but he fought to protect what made the character so special. But one moment in particular hit Winkler on a personal level. After Season 7, Ron Howard made the tough decision to leave the show. He wanted to chase his real passion, directing. By then, Howard was already dipping his toes into filmmaking, and his departure was inevitable. But for Winkler, it felt like a blow. He later admitted that when Ron told him he was leaving, he felt like his life was over. Speaking about that moment in an interview, Winkler said, "My first thought was, I'm going to die now. My great acting partner on this show, my good friend, is no longer going to be here. My life is over." Their chemistry wasn't just important, it was the heartbeat of the show. Richie and Fonzie balanced each other perfectly, and losing that dynamic left him shaken. Winkler later confessed, "When we worked together, there was something that happened out of the blue. We had a shorthand with the script. He went where I went where he went, and it became something else." Still, their bond didn't end when Happy Days did. Howard went on to direct the comedy Night Shift in 1982, and he gave Winkler one of the lead roles. It showed just how much respect the two had for each other, even beyond the show that made them famous. But Ron Howard wasn't the only cast member to walk away. Over the years, several familiar faces left, each for their own reasons. Don Most, who played Ralph, felt his character was getting less and less to do. He wanted to stretch himself as an actor, and shrinking screen time left him frustrated. So, he left. Anson Williams, the lovable Potsy, also struggled. He often felt underused, stuck in the same role with little growth. Instead of staying stuck, he pivoted into directing, where he built a new career behind the camera. Marion Ross, known to millions as Mrs. Cunningham, faced a different challenge. She became so identified with the sweet TV mom that casting directors struggled to see her in other roles. It was the classic trap of typecasting. Linda Pearl, who played Ashley, Fonzie's girlfriend, lasted just one season. She wasn't happy with how shallow her character felt. There wasn't much depth to Ashley, and Pearl didn't see a future for herself on the show, so she walked away. Even behind the scenes, there were distractions. Gary Marshall, the show's creator, had a unique way of building cast chemistry through baseball. He formed his own celebrity baseball team with the Happy Days cast, traveling around the country to play charity games. It was fun, and it kept the actors bonded, but some felt it pulled focus away from the actual work of the show. Hours that could have been spent on scripts or rehearsals sometimes went into planning games and events instead. But this wasn't the only problem. There was the network itself. ABC kept a tight grip on what could and couldn't be shown. This was the 1970s, and television standards were strict. Fonzie couldn't be seen in bed with anyone, no matter how implied the romance. Even the way characters touched each other, the words they used, and the smallest gestures had to fit a very narrow set of rules. The network feared that one wrong move could spark backlash from parents' groups or censors. All of these pressures chipped away at the illusion of Happy Days. What looked effortless on screen was often the result of battles, compromises, and personal sacrifices. Henry Winkler carried the weight of being the face of the show, but that came with creative fights and constant censorship. Other cast members either felt sidelined, trapped, or ready to move on. And yet, the world outside never saw any of that. To fans, Happy Days was a comforting escape, a time capsule of the 1950s that offered laughs and warmth. But inside the studio walls, it was far more complicated. And if you thought that was the toughest part, it only gets messier. Because beyond creative struggles and censorship, Happy Days also faced lawsuits, backstage drama, and controversies that threatened to undo the very legacy the show built. Controversies surrounding the show. By the time Happy Days had cemented itself as one of America's most beloved sitcoms, cracks were already forming beneath the surface. The laughter was real for the audience at home, but behind the curtain, tension, legal battles, and creative missteps started to cloud the show's golden reputation. The biggest scandal didn't even hit until decades after the show went off the air. In 2011, 5 cast members, Anson Williams, Marion Ross, Don Most, Aaron Moran, and the estate of Tom Bosley, filed a lawsuit against CBS. Their claim? They were owed millions in merchandise royalties. When fans bought Happy Days lunchboxes, trading cards, slot machines, or DVDs, the actors were supposed to receive a small cut. According to their contracts, it worked out to 5% of net proceeds. But over the years, the checks stopped coming. By 2011, the cast argued that CBS had shortchanged them out of more than $10 million. Henry Winkler and Ron Howard were notably absent from the lawsuit. Both had enjoyed massive success from the show and chose not to get involved in the fight. Still, for the actors who did file the case, it wasn't just about the money. They felt disrespected and forgotten by a network that had built an empire on their work. CBS responded swiftly, denying any accusations of fraud, but admitting there had been a breach of contract. After months of legal back and forth, the case ended in settlement. Each actor reportedly received around $65,000, far less than the millions they had hoped for, but a victory in the sense that CBS had to acknowledge its mistake. The lawsuit opened the door for conversations about how networks treated performers from the classic TV era, many of whom had no ownership of the shows that made them famous. While that drama played out in courtrooms years later, fans often point to a very different moment as the turning point for Happy Days. It came in Season 5, when the writers cooked up a storyline where Fonzie literally jumped over a shark on water skis. At the time, the stunt was meant to be fun and over the top, but critics and audiences saw it differently. The episode became infamous, and the phrase "jumping the shark" was born. From then on, the term would be used to describe the moment when any TV show or pop culture phenomenon takes a ridiculous turn and loses its magic. Speaking about that controversial moment in an interview, Winkler said, "It's a fun expression, and I get a kick out of the fact that they identified that episode because, granted, maybe it was pushing things a little too far. But I think a lot of good work was still done after that show, and audiences seemed to really respond to it." To be fair, Happy Days didn't collapse immediately after that moment. It ran for 6 more seasons, proving its staying power. But the shark jumping scene became a symbol of how far the show had drifted from its roots. What began as a grounded story about teenagers growing up in 1950s, Milwaukee slowly morphed into something more cartoonish. As the seasons rolled on, critics noticed the shift. Instead of classic cars, soda shops, and leather jackets, the show leaned into disco-inspired storylines and flashy 70s fashion. The authenticity of its 1950s setting started to fade. Audiences who once loved the nostalgia felt the tone was changing into something far less relatable. The more gimmicks were added, the less it felt like the Happy Days that viewers had fallen in love with. Even loyal fans were divided. Some embraced the sillier, more outrageous episodes, while others tuned out, convinced the show had lost its charm. The very thing that once made Happy Days timeless, its ability to capture a specific moment in American culture, was slipping away. And yet, despite lawsuits and creative criticism, the series managed to hold on to its legendary status. Henry Winkler himself has often spoken about how grateful he is for the role, even with the controversies that swirled around it. Because the Fonz didn't just survive the shark, he became part of TV history because of it. Still, there was always something the public didn't fully see, something bigger than lawsuits or critics' reviews. Inside the walls of that studio, Henry Winkler lived under some rules that shaped every moment of his performance and every choice he made as Fonzie. The rules Winkler was forced to follow. At some point during the peak of Happy Days, Henry Winkler became the face of a cultural phenomenon. Everywhere he went, fans wanted a piece of Fonzie. Kids imitated the thumbs up, teens tried to copy the catchphrases, and adults were fascinated by how one character had come to define cool in the 1970s. But while the world wanted Fonzie out in public, network executives had a very different idea. They put a strict rule in place. Henry Winkler could never appear in public as Fonzie. The network reportedly believed mystery was everything. If Winkler dressed in the leather jacket, acted like Fonzie, or even hinted at being him outside the studio, they feared it would break the illusion. Fonzie wasn't supposed to be a person fans could bump into at a mall or see chatting on a late-night talk show. He was supposed to exist only inside the world of Happy Days. By keeping him separate from real life, the network thought they could make him larger than life. For Winkler, this wasn't easy. Imagine being one of the most famous TV stars in America, yet not being allowed to give fans what they wanted most. He respected the rule, but it meant turning down countless requests. Schools, charities, and talk shows all wanted a visit from Fonzie. However, they usually got Henry Winkler instead, who was warm and kind but not in character. The only time he is known to have bent the rule was when he appeared on Sesame Street to promote the letter A. Winkler briefly slipped into Fonzie's persona to help teach the children, and the reaction was electric. Fans loved it, but the experiment was never repeated. The line couldn't be crossed again. Today, actors often lean into their famous roles at conventions or appearances. But in the 1970s, studios believed the wall between character and actor had to stay intact. But that wasn't the only rule Winkler had to adhere to. If Fonzie had a crown, it was his leather jacket. From the first time viewers saw it on screen, the jacket became inseparable from the character. But what fans didn't realize was that network executives treated the jacket as a potential problem. At the time, leather jackets weren't just fashion, they were a symbol. Executives worried that if Fonzie wore it too much, parents might complain that the show was glorifying rebellion or street gangs. To avoid trouble, they came up with a guideline. Fonzie could only wear the leather jacket when he was near his motorcycle. That way, the jacket had a practical purpose as riding gear instead of just a style statement. If the bike wasn't in the scene, producers were expected to keep Fonzie in a windbreaker or something less intimidating. This might have weakened the character, but Gary Marshall wasn't about to let it happen. He knew Fonzie without his jacket would never feel right. So, he came up with a clever workaround. Put the motorcycle in almost every scene. If the jacket was tied to the bike, then the solution was simple. The bike went everywhere. Whether it was parked outside Arnold's drive-in or tucked away in the Cunningham garage, the motorcycle became a permanent part of Fonzie's world. The trick worked. Before long, the jacket wasn't seen as dangerous. It was iconic. Fans wanted to wear it, not fear it. The network's concerns faded as the show's popularity exploded. Eventually, Fonzie's jacket reached a level of fame all on its own. Years later, one of the original jackets was donated to the Smithsonian Institution, recognized as a piece of American television history. That legacy might never have happened if Marshall hadn't been creative in sidestepping the rule. The jacket could have been just another forgotten costume. Instead, it became the symbol of Fonzie's coolness, carried on posters, merchandise, and even Halloween costumes. What began as a restriction turned into one of the most important elements of Happy Day, and one of the smartest quiet victories behind the scenes. The leather jacket wasn't the only style choice that defined Fonzie. His perfectly slicked hair became just as famous. But Henry Winkler decided early on that Fonzie would never be shown fussing with it. In the pilot script, there was a moment where Fonzie was supposed to comb his hair in front of the mirror, a classic greaser move. Winkler played it differently. He pulled out the comb, stopped, looked at himself, and decided the look was already perfect. The audience laughed, and a new tradition was born. From that point on, Winkler made it his personal rule never to comb Fonzie's hair on screen. The joke was simple but effective. Fonzie didn't need to fix his look. He was already flawless. That decision gave the character an effortless edge. It turned what could have been an ordinary gag into a signature move. Fans didn't just remember the line, they remembered the confidence it represented. By sticking to his pact, Winkler added another layer to Fonzie's legend, one that still gets quoted and imitated today. By the end of Happy Days, Winkler had built one of the most legendary characters in TV history, while living under a set of rules few fans ever knew about. But the story didn't end there. When the cameras stopped and Fonzie's jacket was hung up for good, Henry Winkler had to face a whole new chapter of his life that came with struggles, reinvention, and surprising success. Life after Happy Days. When Happy Days finally wrapped, Henry Winkler had spent more than a decade as the Fonz. But the same thing that had made him unforgettable had also become a trap. Winkler found himself typecast so heavily that he couldn't land the kind of roles he truly wanted. He later admitted that those years came with what he called debilitating psychic pain. It wasn't just about missing out on jobs, it was about what it did to his self-worth. He had proven himself as a talented actor long before Happy Days, but the industry couldn't see past Fonzie. Auditions went nowhere, projects fell through, and he started to worry about how he would support his family. In an interview, he admitted, "My agent would put me out there, and people would say, 'You know, he's great. He's a wonderful guy, a really good actor. Funny, so funny.' But he was the Fonz." At the same time, Winkler was also facing a deeply personal discovery. He had always battled difficulties with reading, memorizing lines, and schoolwork, but he had never known the cause. In his 30s, when his son was being evaluated for learning challenges, Henry finally got answers. He was officially diagnosed with dyslexia. The revelation explained so much about his struggles growing up, and even his challenges as an actor. It was both a relief and a painful reminder of what he had been up against his whole life. Instead of letting that diagnosis define him negatively, Winkler turned it into motivation. Alongside author Lynn Oliver, he began writing a children's book series called Hank Zipser, the world's greatest underachiever. Inspired by his own experiences, the books followed the adventures of a boy with dyslexia. The series became a hit, not just with kids, but with parents and teachers who saw how valuable it was for children to see themselves represented. Through Hank Zipser, Winkler gave encouragement to an entire generation of kids who felt left behind in classrooms. The books proved that learning challenges didn't have to mean limits. While his writing career took off, Winkler also reinvented himself behind the camera. He became an executive producer on MacGyver, one of the most creative and enduring action-adventure shows of the 1980s. Producing allowed him to stay active in Hollywood even when acting opportunities were scarce. Slowly, though, the acting roles began to return. In 1998, he surprised a new generation of fans with his role as Coach Klein in Adam Sandler's The Waterboy. The goofy sports comedy introduced Winkler to kids who had never seen Happy Days, and it marked the start of his comeback as a character actor. Soon, he was popping up in memorable guest roles, from the eccentric Barry Zuckerkorn in Arrested Development to Dr. Saperstein in Parks and Recreation. But his biggest acting triumph came later in life. In 2018, he took on the role of Gene Cousineau, a narcissistic but oddly endearing acting coach in HBO's dark comedy Barry. The show was a critical hit, and Winkler's performance earned rave reviews. After decades of ups and downs, he finally took home one of Hollywood's highest honors, an Emmy Award. For many fans, it felt like long overdue recognition for an actor who had given so much to television. Beyond acting, Winkler has become a respected public speaker. He travels widely, sharing his story of resilience, his battles with dyslexia, and his message of never giving up. His openness about self-doubt, failure, and perseverance has made him an inspiration, not just to aspiring actors, but to anyone facing challenges in their own lives. Henry Winkler once worried that his career was over the moment Happy Days ended. Yet, he proved that even after the spotlight fades, there's always a way forward. His journey shows that being remembered for one role doesn't mean being trapped by it. It can be the foundation for building something even greater. Do you think the rules were necessary? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you love juicy deep dives into celebrity lives, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new video.